There, in the historic Chicago neighborhood of Kenwood, home to the University of Chicago and various Frank Lloyd Wright architectural edifices, boast an array of significant homes and venues important to the study of black religions. Among these, on the corner of 48th and Woodlawn, is the former National House of the Nation of Islam and former home of the Nation of Islam's leader, Honorable Elijah Muhammad, now known as the Elijah Muhammad House Museum. The early 20th century home is one of several properties that were owned and operated and built by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in addition to multiple North African-inspired homes that flank the primary residence. The North African-inspired homes, one of which is now the residence of Nation of Islam's leader, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, were commissioned by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to an Egyptian architect. The Egyptian-themed residences, in conjunction with the former National House, collectively narrate a story about the Nation of Islam and its leaders' desire to establish a new religion and way of life for black people.
He built a nearly $100 million empire with plans to purchase the entire south side of Chicago. He built a nation within.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of the District of Illinois Fireside Chat. I am Brother Dr. Leonard C. McKinnis II, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Illinois District Director. I'm served by the Illinois District Historian, a member of the Regional Historical Committee, and also a member of the General Committee on Membership, Brother Chuck Smoot. Good evening, Brother Smoot.
Brother Dr. McKinnis, how are you, sir?
I am well. I am really excited about this conversation this evening. Brothers, you are in for a treat. Do me a favor. Before we get started in this dialogue tonight, click share. Share this in your networks, especially those who are curious about history and the preservation of Black history and Black artifacts. We have a program for you this evening. This program is a part of our larger Fireside Chat series, which also includes a focus on exposing the deep and significant history of Black life in the District of Illinois, which is, of course, our district in Alpha Phi Alpha. And right. Brother Charles Smoot has been incredible in this effort. Tonight, we are going to engage a wonderful curator, an archivist, historian in her own right, Sister Sajda Muhammad, an archivist and the founder of the Elijah Muhammad Home. Brothers, we are in for a riveting dialogue tonight. Before we bring Sister Sajda to the stage, Brother Historian, what would you like to say about this conversation as brothers continue to share? I see the numbers ramping up. Continue to do that, brothers. Share it, and let's get ready for a great conversation. Brother Smoot.
Absolutely. I think, and thank you for that, Brother McKinnis. I think one of the things to emphasize is that when we talk about about history, we as Alpha Men, and we're not just talking about history that directly affected us or our organization, but we look at the larger picture and we look at the larger impact. And I think a conversation such as this that we're going to have tonight is very important to reinforce the fact of the impact of historical artifacts that people may not be aware of, or they've only heard about in the abstract. And I think it is incumbent upon us as members of Alpha Phi Alpha to bring these stories to the front so that we can make sure that we are telling our stories. And when I say we telling our stories, that we as Black people are telling our stories, our Black stories, and making sure that these stories are not lost to the ethers of history. So I'm very excited for this conversation tonight.
Yeah. So, Brother Smoot, I'm going to go ahead and welcome our guest on the stage. Before we welcome her, let me say this, brothers. What Brother Smoot mentioned is absolutely critical. Tonight's conversation is about the necessity of preserving artifacts of Black life. And far too often, those artifacts are controlled by someone else. And in that regard, many times they are not protected or guarded the way that we would. And so we are focusing this evening on one of the most significant homes in the study of Black religion and Black history in Chicago. And we are so excited to welcome to the stage the curator, archivist, and founder of the Elijah Muhammad residence, Sister Sajda Muhammad. Sister Sajda, how are you this evening?
I'm wonderful. Assalamu alaikum, brothers. Peace be unto you.
Wa alaikum salam and peace be unto you, Sister Muhammad.
Welcome, Sister Muhammad. It is truly a honor and a pleasure to have you with us this evening.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
So let's get started. We played a little clip at the beginning of this, but I want to start by giving people a little bit of context for our conversation. So, we're obviously talking about the home that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad lived in, but can you give us a little backstory, a little background onto the development of that house and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's role in creating and developing that building?
Sure. Going back to what we believe is the beginning, the home was built for Mr. William French Burroughs and his wife, Louisa Libby. They were the executors of the Libby's Food Company. He was a Jewish Mason, held lots of meetings in that home. The manifests are incredible. So we see just about anybody who was somebody during the early 20th century that was in that home under his time there, from the founder of Sears and Roebuck's to Montgomery Ward to the Hoovers that lived next door, the Goodyears, you name it. And then he lived there. And what's interesting, the interesting thing that he was known for, brothers in that house, was building their nation within a nation. So having cooperative economics meetings around the dinner table and around different parties. And then in 1952, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad purchased the home. You can see him standing here in the hallway. And he began to build a nation within a nation. And so from 1952 to 1972, this was his primary residence. And everything that happened in the nation happened from this home, from what we call our Savior's letters being written and responded to here, to donations, to just about every Black leader and several world leaders coming to visit him there in that home at 4847 South Woodlawn Avenue. So it is, in fact, definitely sacred ground.
Yeah, I like what you just said about it being sacred ground, having had the opportunity to tour the house a couple of years ago. One of the things that struck me is that really when you walk in, it's one of those buildings, one of those homes that when you walk in, you can almost literally feel the history when you walk in. And and it's not hyperbole to say this, that is almost like it kind of hits you. And so you mentioned some of the types of people, but can you talk a little bit about some of the individuals that were present in the home, and some of maybe a couple of the activities that some of us may have heard of or be aware of that occurred there?
Sure. Of course, there's the very famous meetings with your brother, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That was there. That's him here pictured with his wife, Mother Coretta Scott King. And they were there in the home having a conversation there in the very sacred sitting room. What's interesting about that is that meeting was not recorded, but we did recently discover that there were 2 wiretaps on the home, and that the FBI has since turned those transcripts over to the National Archives, which it looks like we're going to possibly have soon, inshallah, and be able to just share. I've always been curious about what they talked about in those couple of meetings. And then, of course, there's our brother Malcolm X, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, Che Guevara, Kwame Ture, Muhammad Ali, Sam Cooke, Wilma Rudolph, James Baldwin. I mean, I could go on and on. There were many meetings there that were very big interfaith meetings. Lots of meetings with Reverend Dr. Lewis Rawls, who actually lived next door, and who was a friend of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And we've been able to uncover some of that history, some of the things that they met and talked about. The big push, their plan was freedom for Black people. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I hope to be able to show people, that beautiful picture, one of the things that I hope to be able to show people is that there was a lot of synergies in terms of planning and organizing for our freedom. Different approaches, but a common goal. And so these people could meet and come together, uniting around a common goal, which is something that I hope that we begin to replicate today. So it doesn't have to be, is it Martin or Malcolm? You know, is it Prince or Michael Jackson? Why not? Let's just bring all of those thought processes and those mental strategies together and figure out how we push our culture forward. And so a lot of these meetings, those conversations were happening where they were talking about everything from police brutality when Senator Adam Clayton Powell came there, to food deserts and the politics of food and farming. Things like building a parallel system, which is so needed today, so that when the dollar is collapsing and tumbling, we don't feel as much of the brunt of that, especially when inflation is introduced into the economic picture. We would have parallel systems that would allow us to rely on ourselves and do for self. So farming was a big conversation. Manufacturing, clothing manufacturing, owning certain industries. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, believe it or not, was very instrumental in helping to negotiate contracts of artists and athletes like Muhammad Ali and Wilma Rudolph as well. So there, and Bernard King, you know, he spent some time there.
Yeah.
I know Leonard always talks about the story from the 1968 convention, and we can talk about that. But there was a real movement in these homes, and specifically in this one, about what is the strategic plan for us as a people. And even Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he changed after his series of meetings with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And we can't say for certain until we see those transcripts, but shortly after that, then the Poor People's Campaign really began to take off.
Right. And before, and Brother McKinnis, I'll throw it over to you in a second, but
no.
I do think I want to put create some kind of context, because one of the important things that I think about that particular edifice, and similar to what we as a fraternity did, is the neighborhood that this took place in. And this took in and around what we would now call the Brownsville neighborhood. And, you know, this is an area of Chicago that, you know, up and through, you know, the early mid 1950s was largely, you know, as much, according to some estimates, 65 to 70% Black. And so when you talk about the creating a self-sustaining community, like there was a thriving Black community in that, where you mentioned the economic issue, where I read a stat once, is back in the late 1950s, the Black dollar circulated in the Bronzeville area as much as between 7 to 9 times before leaving that community.
Yes.
Compare that to now, where you're talking maybe 1 to 2 times before it leaves a community.
6 hours.
So, okay, 6 hours, you know, even ridiculously less. And I think the understanding what type of thriving neighborhood and community that we had at that time, you know, even amidst all the racism and the bigotry and prejudice that occurred during that time, that we did have a thriving community. And it seems that one of the things that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was involved in was developing that community further than what was just existing in what we call Bronzeville now at the time.
You know what? It's I thank you for making that point, because I've been doing a lot of writing, comparing and contrasting what was happening then and what is happening now. And there was and is a concerted effort to shorten the amount of time that that dollar circulated in our community. Because when a dollar doesn't circulate, or when it circulates in such a short fashion in a community like that, then the ability to invest in the long-term and generational wealth and the ongoing concern of the community goes way down.
Right.
And so when you look at the work that they were doing back then at that time, that those microcosms of unity were really designing a future for us today. And I don't think we'd be losing voting rights and dealing with gerrymandering and things that we're dealing with today had we been able to continue this type of unity and these types of conversations.
Absolutely. Brother McInnes?
Yeah, no, this is fascinating. I mean, I knew this would be a great conversation, and it's already leading in that direction. I want to just take a small step, not backwards, Smoot, but I want to take a pivot, if you will. Right?
Absolutely.
I didn't want the brothers to come after me for saying take a step back, but there is something about not just the house itself as a national symbol of the Black freedom movement, but there's also this conversation here about the significance and the fundamental importance, Sister Sajda, of maintaining artifacts of Black life, right?
Yeah.
In other words, it's easy to kind of look at Black institutions, whether it's churches, universities, or any other institution that Black folk built, and just watch it, wither away. But there is something about this home that has inspired you as a curator, as an archivist, to not only preserve the home, but to narrate a story about how Black life is unfolding in Black Bronzeville, right, in Chicago. Talk a bit about, if you can, the significance of preservation efforts of Black life and why this is not only a concern for believers in the Nation of Islam, right, but the preservation of history is a concern for any Black folk, any Black organization like Alpha Phi Alpha, like the Divine Nine, who should have some investment in how we preserve and tell our history.
Yes, there has to be, Leonard, what I call, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad called for separation. And he demonstrated to us that integration would be the end of a lot of the work that we were doing. And so I like to think about, now we're thinking about cultural separation, because so much of our history and culture have been tied to pop culture, which is trend-based. So anything that's old is not considered hot. Anything that is not new and, trending, if you will, people are taught are not of interest. But see, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad told us that history is the best at rewarding its student. And so when we understand the patterns of history, then we understand where we're going, and we can almost predict or prophesize the future. A lot of what's happening in our community, especially in urban communities, because of what we are calling gentrification, a lot of our history is on the verge of becoming extinct, because much of it happened in red line districts in the inner city that are now being destroyed. And it's incumbent upon us as a people to value and respect our history, our ancestors, those that came before us, regardless of what the culture, the pop culture says today in terms of labeling each of us, Muslim, Christian, Black, white, FDA, whatever new label they've given us, Negro, colored, African American, Black. We have to say, no, we're going to preserve our history. We got to start with ourselves and our own organizations, and then respect and support the culture of others. And I say this, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that one day they were going to let us go. And we're starting to see that today. We see a lot of federal dollars that were earmarked for the preservation of history being redirected away from anything that is Black owned, Black driven, Black dominant. And I'm specifically talking about Black people here. It's happening with other minority groups too, but specifically addressing the conversation about Black, because I believe that we have to be very specific in the language. But anything now, that history that funding is going away. So now we're competing for local dollars. Everybody's competing for the same local dollars, making the competition steeper. And then oftentimes when people give us the money, they want to tell us, well, tell the story this way. And so what I'm saying is, what I really am pushing as far as a movement is that we start to take our discretionary income.
In the wake of racial and social unrest, in the period of Black denigration, the Nation of Islam has a long and storied tradition of personal and collective
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think that was just a little minor glitch.
A little snafu. That's okay.
It's a little captain's glitch. But anyway.
Yeah, real quick, I'll close this point out by saying that those of us that have discretionary income, we have to find a way to start investing in our own history. We can no longer expect somebody who's writing us out of history, taking our history out of schools, to spend money on us preserving our history. So we got those of us out here that spend $350,000 on a watch, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 on purses. Leonard, I think you're muted. But let's take that money and invest it in preserving our history. Everything that our ancestors have experienced should be in a monument, an archive, a house, something somewhere. And so one of the things we want to do with the house is have these small conversations. And I think these conversations need to be happening in homes in our neighborhood, just like our history is in all of our neighborhoods. We need to have these conversations in these homes.
And Sajda, I do want to just take a look at this real quick to illustrate that this wasn't an easy process for you. All right, let's just take a quick look.
Lot across the street because the FBI, CIA, one of those agencies used to spy on him from that lot. And when the FOI went over to that lot and searched the lot, they found a spy's lair. So there were binoculars over there, there were bullets. We believe they were planning his assassination. So he did what any powerful man did and just said, I'm gonna buy all the land. Tore down all the trees and then eventually ended up building those 4 houses over there. But the $100 million empire, the minister told me, was a template.
No, Sajda, how is, we can just walk over there and talk, because I'm really curious about the property and investment of Honorable Elijah Muhammad. How is the nation financing? Is something about loans, or this is just the real investment of believers in the Nation of Islam?
Well, the thought that the bank would give the Honorable Elijah Muhammad a loan is pretty far-fetched. We can't even get loans today, so you already know. Yeah, so he's true businessman, building it, through donations, taking that money, and instead of putting it in his pocket and enriching himself, building businesses, putting goods and services out into the community that would help the community.
Okay.
So following up and materializing the faith. So we're talking about, for example, how to eat to live. Not just talking about it, but being about it. Grocery stores, restaurants that don't serve processed food or pork. You're talking about cleaners, barbershops, services that are important to us, where we traditionally would get a lot of mistreatment when we would go to those places. And even now, today, when you think about it, this is how a lot of this poison is entering into our community with fake foods and things like that.
And so, Sajda, it seems to me that what you're trying to recapture is a larger historical story that is about the residents, but it's also about Black ownership, right? And the way that Black life becomes cultivated in large metropolitan entities that do not require necessarily the investment from outside. In other words, as you often say, do for self. So the home becomes a symbol of this. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. Finding a way. You can't have this conversation without having an economics conversation. So much of what's happening and what has been happening in society is that, corporations control us, and then they control policies, and then you get this imbalance between corporations and policies, and then Black people, for example, get kind of caught up in the mix, and we don't have any ownership and not a lot of power. Well, what we're talking about doing is having these conversations again so that we can begin to think about ownership. Let's start building infrastructure so that we can work to educate ourselves, so that we can work to heal ourselves. We have AI coming that's going to impact a lot of our Black doctors. So what do we do about what is our strategy? We are now living in a space where the majority of Black people that have a certain discretionary income are going to be over the age of 65. So what does that mean for the future of our community if our youth are graduating from college and can't find a job? So this kind of conversation was happening in this house. So what we're hoping is through the archives that we will begin to share, some of the conversations that we'll be able to have, we will use it not only as a way to learn history, but a way to write our future and move in a better direction. So the education has to be there because it's not available in our school systems. And in a lot of cases, it's just not there.
So, brother McKenna, you're muted again, but I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna pass it back. Sajda's laugh is so typical of me to have my
yes it is
in the middle of a live interview. But I'm gonna pass it back to you, Smooth. I want to do that by briefly watching this clip in which Sister Sajda goes into the home, and then you'll get it and take some content from there.
Visitors, right?
So this whole house was a world.
Yeah.
Okay. So in this room, not only was it a meeting space, he held court in here for cases that were internal to the Nation of Islam. There were interviews held here. For example, in this space, just here alone, so many iconic pictures that you've seen from here where him meeting with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, there, right there along that wall.
So in this space,
right here,
was the Reverend Martin Luther King.
Right here, walk right this way and right over there and sat down. Then around here, you'll see, if you've ever seen any of the Irv Kupcinet interviews and some of those famous interviews that are all over YouTube, they were taking place in this part of the room as well. There's been pictures you may have seen with the Democratic National Convention, the Boston Seminary College, Kwame Nkrumah. You see so many pictures of Muhammad Ali just sitting right here in this space.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a story. The Georgia delegation came to Chicago, right? And
or they were trying to get to Chicago.
They were trying to get here, right? They didn't have a place to sleep. They didn't have a place to, eat. They were
no food, no security, and the Georgia Democratic Convention did not support them coming to the convention.
And they show up at this home.
Well, one of their staff members actually met one of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's staff members, told him the problem that they were having, and he said, well, why don't you come here and we'll see if my boss can help you. One of the things that, if you ever read What the Muslims Want and Believe, which is the Muslim program on the back of then Muhammad Speaks newspaper, now the Final Call newspaper, a lot of those wants are very political in nature. And so, to support that delegation and actually later have subsequent meetings with some of them was very groundbreaking.
Yeah, yeah. And Sarge, I couldn't help but notice this beautiful.
So there are a couple of things, and it's I want to bring up, but one of the things is that when you talk about those individuals making space for those individuals during the 1968 convention, I think there was a impression or a perception that that was something that the nation would not have necessarily gotten involved in because it was political and and when I say political, I mean elected politics. But what gets me about that story regarding the '68 convention, knowing how contentious it was, is that what was more important was making a safe place for blacks, providing a safe place for our people to come and rest and abide. And so and see that seems to be one of the things that home represents, and particularly that through your work that you are pushing about that safety, creating that safety for the community. Can you elaborate a little bit on not only historically uh, pushing that area of safety, but ways we can look at recreating that safety net, in the present and for the future?
What's so interesting is that as I continue to research and learn and really connect, because when you do this work, you really connect with the person that you're researching
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
really connect with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And listening to the accounts of what other people said about him, he was a very kind man,
Right.
and a very generous man. And even in reviewing the probate records later from 76 and 77, the Illinois Attorney General, I forget his name at the time, said he was the most philanthropic man he had ever seen. And this is from them auditing his life.
Right.
Because they were trying to make a judgment about the estate. And so that type of warm-heartedness and philanthropic nature and arming people with solutions to problems was the type of safety net he provided. And it's something that I picked up even in my own personal practice, because I believe that we need people that can help us solve problems. So if somebody comes to me and I can help them to finish a project or solve a problem or find an answer to something, that is a safety net that I think over a certain period of time, a lot of us were missing. We run into a problem, maybe don't have a place to stay, maybe don't know what to do next, get in trouble, and there's nobody to go to. But in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad at that time, there was a safety net, a place you could go to have that conversation. And he was very open to that.
Yeah, I think that is that is so profoundly powerful, that the safety of those, we in Alpha, we have a saying where we say Alpha's greatest interest lies outside of itself. Mm-hmm. And I see echoes of that being similarly, and when we talk about issues of some of the things that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad did and sought to create, is that he sought to create opportunities for people that were not just for Muslims, but that were for the larger Black community. Mm-hmm. And I think that aspect is very important. Can you tell us a little bit, what after, we've talked a little bit about what happened after the 68 convention and what happened in the early 70s. Can you talk a little bit about the activities and the actions of what happened in the ensuing years, particularly after the passing of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad?
Sure, I can talk about what I do know. Um, in 19, so first of all, just go back. If you go from all of this happened in a short period of time, when you think about time, now that we all have experienced time. So in a 20-year period, 1952 moving into this home to 1972, you can take it up to 1975, but really building an empire, that's fast.
Right.
So you got to have some skills, you got to know something, regardless of who you are, to be able to have that type of an accomplishment in that short period of time. And what happened subsequent to 1975, subsequent to his departure, his son took over, and the changing of the guard, the changing of the view of how the Nation of Islam was supposed to go, really led to the dismantling of the beginning of a great empire. In 1978, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan stood back up and decided to rebuild the Nation of Islam. But from that period of 1975 to 1978, there was this folding in of the Nation of Islam into what is called, and I don't want to offend anybody, into what is called Orthodox Islam, okay, which is a less focus specifically on us as Black people and the resurrection. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and then the mantle that the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan picked up, was the number one thing, was the resurrection of what we call the dead. So the upliftment of Black people, the self-improvement process, as the minister's study guides call it, which is the basis of community development. And during that period of time, it took on a different shape, and the properties were dissolved. And we'll tell that story. We've got lots of records that talk about that. And it was I call it a blip in our Black history, because the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was the one who endeared us to calling ourselves brothers and sisters. He endeared us to love one another, leading to the Black Power movement. And he endeared us to unity, cooperative economics, doing something for ourselves, looking out for brothers, for one another, and literally making our community a better place to stay. And this is my opinion, when we got folded into that larger community, we lost a lot of that. So those concentrated neighborhoods, at the same time, you had desegregation happening. People began to move. There was less concentration in the inner cities. So you started to see, we didn't have customers anymore for those stores and those cleaners and all those retail establishments that were set up. Now you disband the customer base, the stores are going to close. And then in those communities, you got the moving in of the big box systems. So the empire crumbled, if you will. But fortunately, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan in 1978 stood back up, rebuilt the Nation of Islam, and the rest is history. And so now we are trying to not just replicate, but move that forward in terms of making our communities a better place to stay, a better place to live, uniting with brothers and sisters around the diaspora, and just really building what I'm calling a parallel system that really is that really can become our new safety net, Brother Smooth.
Right.
You talked about a safety net. To me, that safety net is a new parallel system.
And so I would be remiss, one of the things. So when I wrote my book on the history of Alpha in Illinois, and after during the research for my book, I came upon what to me at that time was an unknown piece of history, and that was our organization's role in preserving the home. So as what was explained to me, there was a tax lien on the property in 1982 or 1983. A bid was made, but whatever organization placed the bid couldn't pay it off, and Alpha Phi Alpha came in and won the auction. And this was, at the time, our executive secretary, for brothers watching, will remember Brother James Tiny Blanton, who was a giant in the organization, and Ozell Sutton was a general president. But as relayed to me by Brother Daryl Matthews, who is currently a past general president, but was involved in it, he talks about getting on the phone and talking about, well, what do we do, and them approaching the nation and saying, hey, we're going to take this. We know you guys can't do it, but we'll take it. We'll hold it for 5 years. Can you do it in 5 years? And this was, it was approved by the fraternity. The amount was paid back with interest. And at one point, I believe they said in 1988, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who is now a member of another organization, but we're not going to speak on that. But he publicly thanked, Alpha Phi Alpha for not allowing the mansion to fall into the wrong hands.
So, Chuck, was this 4855 or 4847?
4847.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
And so I asked Brother Matthews directly why they undertook something like this that would have no direct benefit to the fraternity. And the response he gave me at the time was, and it's a similar thing, but it was an effort to preserve our history of our people, because if we didn't, no one else would. And I'll tell you, Sister Muhammad, of everything that was in my book, that was the one thing that brothers responded to the most. They're like, I had no idea, and that's so cool, and what have you. So for me, I take it as a little bit of source of pride that our organization was able to, help and maintain the building on behalf of the nation. And this kind of goes into my next point, because earlier you were talking about different conversations that need to be had, and how we need to have different conversations centering around what we can do in our community. And what I sense in that there is kind of a collaborative tone in when you talk about that. So can you talk a little bit about how you see these collaborative, so I'm making both general and specific, how you see these conversations and these collaborative efforts taking place, but also what role can Alpha Phi Alpha play in supporting the mission and the aims of the Elijah Muhammad House and preserving and promoting that history?
So the idea, Brother Smoot, is to create a living space. I think what happens is so much when we build spaces that represent our history, there's this old school tone of museum, which is kind of hard, lifeless, dead.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you go, it's interesting, but it's not alive. But the idea here is to curate a living space that honors the past, but also serves the future. And that is through using things like art to tell a story. Art meaning could be painting, could be drawing, could be music, could be conversations, talking about archives. So instead of just saying, here's an archival piece of history, sit it here and let everybody look at it, let's curate a conversation to make that piece come alive, just like the house rises up to greet you when you enter the home. So that's the idea. Organizations like Alpha Phi Alpha, what we are looking for them to do is there are sponsoring rooms, events, anything that supports the living mission of the home. So it could be ongoing, some kind of ongoing programming. We can certainly talk about that. There's work that Leonard and I are doing together through his work with the University of Illinois, which I'm sure he'll talk about. But that kind of thing, we don't want to just say, we want to move away from the traditional concept of how we store and preserve archives. We want them to come alive. So if we're looking at, say, the speech between, or the conversations between the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and and Dr. Martin Luther King, and we said, you know what, we've got these transcripts, let's have a conversation about it. That's something to me that the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity can be very much a part of.
Absolutely.
And the goal is, obviously, there'll be small audiences there in the home that we can broadcast around the world to share these types of conversations and these types of development, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Brother McKinnis, did you want to?
Yeah, I would, as we're almost at our 10-minute mark, but I will say this, an archive is an entity or space in which records, stories, life, if I can just kind of blanket it that way, is preserved, right? What we know is that the story of Black life in North America is not a complete story without the various religious stories that make up who and what Black life is in the US of A, right? Mm-hmm. And so when one talks about a museum, like the former residence of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I think it's important for our audience to understand that a museum, and this is what Sister Sajda was getting at, is not a dead space, right? It is not a static space. It is a space within which movement happens and where the ancestors are present, where they speak, where we encounter. Here's an example. If you were like me, you may have been to the National African American Museum at the Smithsonian, right? You may have gone down to the museum in Charleston or the museum in Alabama, right? The slave museum, the lynching museum. I don't know a single person who leaves those spaces untouched. In other words, there's always something about what this space did to me. Mm-hmm. So museums are not dead. They are very much alive, and there are ways in which the human connection comes into deep contact with the energy within spaces, right? The residents that we're talking about did not escape that kind of energetic activity that manifests within these spaces, right? And by the way, we should say this, and this is a part we didn't get into very much, but the home exists in one of the most infamous areas of redlining in the history of Black Chicago.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
People have a conception that because the University of Chicago, as a bastion of liberalism, right, was present in this space, that somehow Kenwood and Hyde Park escaped redlining. No, they did not. Right. It was not until the urban renewal program in the 1970s and late 1960s where Black folk began to have access to these spaces. Right. So that we have 2, 3 iconic residences on a single block. It seems to me that Kenwood is already an historical moment in time, right? Yeah. You're talking about Muhammad Ali at the very end of the block. You're talking about the residence of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And then, of course, Laurel's, the residence was purchased by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Across the street, you have the 4 or 5 edifices that mimic the Egyptian architecture of the home that was built. We're talking about Black history in a single block, right? That is living. And I should say this, and I'll pause. this architecture of these homes should be understood as significant as the Frank Lloyd Wright homes in Hyde Park. In other words, the Frank Lloyd Wright homes tell a story, but these homes also tell a story about how Black life unfolds in the middle of the Great Migration in the Black metropolis, if you will. So I think brothers and those who are watching should really tune in to what's happening in this kind of historical unfolding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I can say this,
Yep.
because I would be remiss if I didn't. I never met the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Although I've been a lover of history since the 4th grade, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan is quoted as saying that he loved the Honorable Elijah Muhammad so much that he wanted everybody else to love him in that way. And during my tenure of working for him, he really put that love, a piece of that love, into me. So that love is what I am using to help fuel and push forward the need to continue to preserve his work, his efforts, his desires for Black people in America, and really help unravel some of the propaganda that was unleashed against all of our Black leaders, but specifically the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And you have a lot of people who don't like him or the minister, and they really have no reason not to. It's just because somebody said they should. And so that's something I want to get us out of too, because we have a tendency to be these binary thinkers. The pop culture tells us who to like, who not to like. And instead of us being independent thinkers and saying, you know what, I can take a little from each platform and create my own personal operating platform that will help me with my own resurrection process, we tend to just cut people off that we don't like and allow the stories to be mistold, so we don't get anything from the efforts of these amazing people that have fought and given their lives for our freedom.
Absolutely. So, Sister Muhammad, how can you, because I want to, as I referenced at the beginning of this, I had the distinct pleasure to tour the facility, and I will say personally, it was not only a historical experience for me, but it was a spiritual experience for me. I literally felt goosebumps at one point when you pointed something out, and you're like, where I was standing, and that was where Malcolm X stood and where Dr. King stood, and it was almost overwhelming. And I kind of want I think other people should have that experience. So how can others tour the facility? How can they support the facility moving forward?
Yeah, so I don't know if Dr. McInnes wants to tell his story, but the house is very much alive, and it really rises up to greet you when you come inside. And but we are having we've been having a series of different events. I just had one with I don't know if you came with Dr. McInnes, where we had the discussion around the documentary that we're working on. We've got some other events coming up. So if you visit us online, I think Leonard had the website up there, but if you can't remember it, just go ElijahMuhammadHouse.com. They all point to the same site. Just go to ElijahMuhammadHouse.com, join our mailing list. We've got some things happening in June, July, and August that we will certainly let you know about and give you an opportunity. And because we don't have a massive amount of people that we can fit inside of there, we always broadcast live so that everybody can experience it. But you should get an experience yourself of visiting the home. So join the mailing list, make a request, support our programs. Again, this is independent type of preservation effort. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we support anybody that we see that's trying to work to preserve our history that is now happening all around the country.
Absolutely. And you know, I mean, this has been such a pleasure, Sister Muhammad, and I really want to keep going. I want to ask you 1,000 more questions, but we are pressed for time. However, I would be remiss if I didn't push back on something you said earlier, when you were talking about how we should just treat everyone the same way, and you mentioned, it shouldn't be a Prince versus Michael Jackson. No, it should just be Prince. So I just have to put that out there.
I think it should just be Prince too, but I don't want nobody telling me that it should just. You can't tell me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I love me some Michael Jackson, but you can't tell me that I got to just choose one because I'm a diehard Prince fan. So
yeah, I just have to throw that out.
I understand.
So I do want to remind you again, please visit the website. Thank you for sharing your passion, for your hard work. And, I ultimately hope brothers and others watching this will get inspired, because I do think there are a number of areas of cooperation that our organizations can undertake, and
Absolutely.
that we can work with each other, because at the end of the day, we're all running the same race. And
same race.
And so it's just a matter that even though we may be in different lanes, our end goal is all the same. And so, Sister Muhammad, again, I cannot thank you enough. I can't wait to revisit the former residence of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad again, and maybe I won't be so emotionally overcome next time. But with that being said, I do want to thank you, and I want to throw it over before I do throw it over to Brother McKenna. To everyone watching, please hit like and subscribe. Share this. This is available on YouTube, so even if you're not watching it live, please share it with someone you think may find it interesting, and find ways for our organization and others to continue to work together. Brother McInnes.
Thank you, Brother Smoot and Sister Sajda. Let me say that, the District of Illinois Historical Committee is not only committed to broadcasting the history of Alpha Phi Alpha as an entity, but educating the broader public on the history of Black life in our great state. And so tonight's episode was one of many that will continue to come forward as we think about history, Black life, and Illinois. Let me say this, Brother Smoot. I know you've organized in the past the Alpha Tour. We might have to connect with Sister Sajda and do an Alpha field trip to
Absolutely.
the home.
Absolutely.
I bet that thing would sell out real quick.
Absolutely. I think we should do it.
So to the brothers who are watching, thank you for tuning in and for sharing this. We certainly hope that you have had the opportunity to learn more about one of the iconic homes in the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. I do got to shout out Brother Clayton Muhammad. So good to see him on here tonight. I've known Clayton for many, many years since that brother became an Alpha. Have not had a chance to connect with him in quite a while, but my goodness, you never know how certain programming brings out different audiences. And so It is so good to see Brother Clayton Muhammad chiming in tonight. To our guest, Sister Sajda, thank you very much. We have been on a journey now for a few years together, doing some really important work. And Sister Sajda knows me not only as Leonard, but as absent-minded professor, many other things. So I want to thank her for joining the men of Alpha Phi Alpha tonight. And to Brother Smoot, once again, thank you for being the incredible historian to our state as you are, and also in our fraternity. To the brothers in the call, it is 8:00 on the dot. Good evening, and we'll see you next time by the fireside.